We are just on past. I'm sure a few more people might join. But tonight, the topic of our Cloud Cafe is there is room at the inn, and we are going to be debunking the Nationality and Borders Bill. So the Nationality and Borders Bill makes arriving in the UK without permission a criminal offence, and this is going to be our topic of discussion tonight. We're discussing how the bill overturns 70 years of UK adherence to the 1952 Refugee Convention and curtails the rights of refugees. The Cloud Cafes are organised by a wonderful team at Stroud District Green Party, and this is the last one of the year, and we really want to thank everybody for attending these sessions and engaging with us throughout 2021. This evening we've got three fantastic speakers whose intention is to contextualize the broader issues that create the need for movement of people across the world and examine the implications of the Nationality and Borders Bill from personal perspectives and professional perspectives, rather than examining it from a legal standpoint. If people have questions that can't be answered in the room, then we're more than happy to point you in the right direction or try and find an answer to those questions. But we just wanted to outline that at the beginning of this discussion. So if everybody who is not a speaker could turn their camera off, we'll invite you back for the question and answer at the end of the session. Then that would be fantastic. And then we should just be left with our three main speakers. So first of all, we're going to be having Caroline, who is the founder and manager of Hills House Retreats in Amberley, which offers sanctuary breaks for refugees, asylum seekers, and those seeking sanctuary in the UK. She's been the co-chair of Bristol City of Sanctuary since 2017 and was a former manager of Bristol Refugee Rights, providing the first social and welcome centres for refugees in Bristol. Her background is in race equality, community and training work in Rochdale, Manchester and Swindon. So from the north, I assume, just like me, Caroline. Nice to have another person there from there. So please take us away with your 10 minutes and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you very much, Jenny, and thank you to Elizabeth and others for inviting me to join you tonight. It's certainly a subject very near to my heart, and I'm really happy to try to discuss the implications of this bill with you, which you probably have heard has just passed its third reading in the Commons 2 or 3 hours ago, which is shocking news, but not in a way unexpected either. Also, thank you to everybody who's coming to listen to the bill tonight. I think it's really important we try and get our heads around it. It's a horrendous piece of legislation. My reason for being here, as Jenny said, is I'm not a lawyer or legal expert, but I do have 16 years of experience in the refugee sector in Bristol, and was privileged to be developing and managing a welcome centre there for 8 years. So I know many people who've gone through the asylum process as it is at the moment, and know how hard that is. And a particular thing I wanted to emphasise here is knowing how people experience the pain of not being believed. And some have said that is a kind of mental torture equivalent to what they experienced, which led them to flee their own country. And I think this is at the root of this bill, is that unwillingness to believe that people are genuine. I'm going to try and share a thing, because there are quite a few facts here. So I'll see if I can. Not yet. Yes. Okay. Have you got anything up? Right. Now let me just get this going. From the beginning. How is that?
That's perfect.
Great. Thank you. So this is what we're going to be discussing tonight, and I've put it down here as the anti-refugee bill, and I hope to explain why it has been dubbed as this by many campaigning organisations. The whole bill speaks of hostility to refugees in every single clause, and it will make make matters very much worse for people who are seeking sanctuary here. So it's due to go to the Lords in, whoops. Oh, okay. I've missed one. Anyway, it's due to go to the Lords in probably in next year, and that's our only hope really of turning anything around. So I think we need to see the bill in the context of the present asylum process. So I'm sure some people will be familiar with this, but I've often been surprised at how little people do know about it. And it is quite complicated. So, but I think it helps us to see why this bill is so bad. So if you'll bear with me, I'll talk about the present situation. So first of all, a few definitions. The Refugee Convention that Jenny mentioned in 1951 defined both the definitions of refugee and the rights that go with refugee status. So refugee is someone who is unable or unwilling to return to their country of origin owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion. It's a very difficult threshold to meet, and it's part of what makes the asylum process so difficult is to prove this. So the key point about the rights is Article 31, which gives an absolute right for anyone to cross a border if their life is endangered and to claim asylum in a safe country. An absolute right to cross a border if life is endangered and to claim asylum in a safe country. It's really important to recognize that this is what the convention said, and 149 countries signed this, and it's pertained until now. You may notice that war, conflict, and climate change are not included in the above convention, but they are covered as by the European Convention of Human Rights, which allows a status called humanitarian protection. So many people here have either refugee status or humanitarian protection, either of which is approximately the same in terms of rights once people have got those grants. Just to define the difference between asylum seeker and refugee, very complicated, common misunderstanding or difficulty with what's the difference. So refugee, broadly speaking, obviously somebody who's been forced to leave their home, but when it comes to the distinction within this country, we say that while somebody is waiting for their claim to be assessed, they've come in, they've made a claim, they're waiting for it to be assessed, they'd be called an asylum seeker, which has very few rights going with it. No right to work, very limited income, much less than state benefits, and limited access to healthcare and to education. So it's a very sort of difficult position to be in, and some people are in it for a very long time. Once refugee status is granted, then at present, whether it's humanitarian protection or refugee status, at present people have the same full citizens' rights as any other person living in this country. The other confusion, I think, is between asylum and resettlement. And I think this is another important one that government's been playing with. So the resettlement program has really referred to particular countries, groups of people who are vulnerable because of conflict. So obviously Syria is the most recent, well, we'll come to the Afghan one in a minute, but the Syrian resettlement program brought about 20,000 people here. It's now closed. There are some families in Stroud, but these are people who have fled from the conflict zone and have been living in a camp. So from Syria, mainly Jordan or Lebanon, and have been identified by the UN Refugee Agency as being particularly vulnerable and in need of protection, and have been allocated to a receiving country. So they come with full rights of refugee status and a package of support. But people who come by the asylum route have made tremendously hazardous journeys on their own, through third countries, through across the water, life-threatening all the way. And I've spoken to people who've made these journeys and said, how did you decide the next step? And they said, we had no choice. At every stage, we had no choice. Terrifying thought, and especially when it means getting on one of those boats at the end of the journey. So that's the main route that people have come actually here. And by one of these terribly heavy, or hanging underneath a lorry, a truck to come across, to get across the channel, or inside a truck. And it's the key thing is that that way of coming is lawful in this, as long as you claim asylum on arrival. So it's that's a point I want to stress, that it's not an illegal thing to do, to come by one of that route, and then as long as you claim asylum straight away. And the other thing, so if refugee status is granted after a period of time of waiting, then full rights, citizens' rights are given, and also a person has a right to bring their family to join them, family they've left behind in the danger zone. So now a few figures. Roughly 35 or 40,000 people over the last 20 years. That's an average number of people who come here to claim asylum, and that includes the resettlement figures. And currently, it's not high. I mean, there were 100,000 in the early 2000s per year. So it's only 5 to 10% of total immigration, something like 0.5% of the whole population. I mean, the numbers are not small, and so despite the government rhetoric, UK is somewhere around 5th, 6th, 7th in Europe in absolute numbers, and 17th if you take it per head of population. So we are, and that includes the resettlement figures. So we're not taking huge numbers, not doing our share, say. The majority of those do come by these so-called irregular routes. And they are not from, I mean, they're from many, many countries. So in Bristol, we had people from between 70 and 100 countries at any one time. So when people arrive here, they're dispersed to cities, receiving cities around the country. So Bristol has about 400 Home Office contracted spaces for people to live. Gloucester has somewhere around 300, Swindon, Plymouth, those are the places in the southwest. People live in those houses with very little and can wait years for a decision. So 7 years ago, a first decision was made within 6 months. Now, first about 87% of first decisions were made within 6 months. Now it's down to 20%. Appeal shouldn't be there, sorry. This shows the system is already failing. And in fact, there's a huge backlog of decisions. There's about 70,000 people waiting for a decision at the moment, and some people wait years. So this is just to indicate that the current system is failing. So what's the context of the bill? Well, the boat crossings have really increased, and this is probably linked to the fact that the camps at Calais were demolished. It doesn't stop people wanting to seek asylum, so they go find other routes, and it also makes it more profitable for people smugglers, because it's a more difficult route. So the numbers are a bit similar, but there are people taking even more dangerous routes. The Home Office response to this is based on a whole lot of falsehoods and disbeliefs. So, for instance, this thing that the Home Secretary said not so long ago, that 70% of people crossing the Channel were economic migrants. They hadn't put in their claims. Nobody knows. But what we do know is that in 2020, 98% of people crossing the Channel made asylum claims. And we also know that 60% of those are granted. So this is manifestly a falsehood and puts a doubt in people's minds. She's also made statements about judicial reviews merely frustrating the system, implying that there should not be an independent oversight of Home Office decisions. So it's called the Nationality and Borders Bill. There are very few nationality clauses, and all the rest of the bill relates to actually asylum. It doesn't relate to other forms of immigration at all. And all those provisions are detrimental to asylum seekers, even against the present system. Hence, it has been dubbed the anti-refugee bill. I wanted to pick out here a statement from the Home Office. So this is a Home Office blog, which you can easily get. You just put in Home Office channel crossings, and you get this as a government website. And they say the intention of the bill is to do these 6 things: to be tough on people smugglers, to deter illegal entry, to introduce new powers to remove asylum seekers. That's the terrible offshoring plan. to establish new accommodation centres. We think of the Napier Barracks, and there are hotels in Bristol that have been commandeered because they're so behind with their processing of claims. To speed up the removal of those with no right to be in the UK, and to strengthen border force powers to stop and redirect vessels. Now, every one of those, there speaks of no compassion at all in there. It's all about hostility and pushing people back. I'm just going to talk about the two that are in red because we don't have too much time, but we can come back to the others later if there's time. So deter illegal entry is the key, it's the heart of this bill. And they've used illegal inappropriately right from the start. Illegal immigrants, illegal asylum seekers, illegal routes. These are the phrases that get used. But as I've tried to explain earlier, asylum seekers are not illegal. They have come by an irregular route and a very dangerous route, but it's not illegal to do that. So it's a very misleading adjective to use. And there are no safe routes for the people who are risking a channel crossing. There is no safe way for them to come. So they must do it that way. They must escape and they must do it that way. The main countries of origin currently, people crossing the channel, are Syria, Iran, Eritrea, Yemen, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Sudan. And those are familiar as conflict zones. Now, what's going to happen is, according to this bill, that people who come this way to claim asylum, who are the majority of people who need asylum in UK, will be treated differently, inferiorly to people who've come by the resettlement route or some other ways, which is not quite clear what are going to count as group one. But anyway, the group two, which will be the majority, can face these things when they arrive. Up to 4 years imprisonment for taking a so-called illegal route. Delay before their claim is considered at all. So there'll be at least 6 months while it's decided whether the claim is even admissible. They lose their rights if they're granted refugee status, and we know that at least 60% of people who claim asylum this way are likely to be granted refugee status in the end, but they will lose their rights for family reunion. They won't get, it has been 5 years in the first instance, and then a reapplication, which is fairly, it's not too onerous, and they've got permanent leave to remain, indefinite leave to remain. But now there'll be 3 lots of 2.5 years to keep reapplying, and they will have no recourse to public funds. So if they're out of a job, there's a pandemic. If they're sick, there'll be no recourse to public funds. Now, these are hugely inequitable, and it's not been done, as far as we know, in other countries to make such a distinction according to the way that people have travelled. Nothing to do with the genuineness of their claim. It's all about how they got here. Briefly on the offshoring question, there's an idea of sending people to a third country to have their claims, to wait there while their claims are processed. But this is altogether a bad idea. The only example we know is Australia, where camps had to be medically evacuated in 2019. And if people are sent to a third country, there'll be no oversight. Even the removal centre Brook House in London was found to be brutally managed by filming that was done in the detention, in the removal centre, and that was being run by Serco, and it's right under the nose of the Home Office. So what would happen if people were being kind of processed far away? And the only place that we've heard might happen is Ascension Island, where actually a few years ago there was a report on the widespread child sex abuse on that island, and St Helena. So it's an extremely bad idea, and it's actually shocking they're considering it. And I've put down there offshore in France or Europe. I mean, if there's offshoring to be considered, it could be the place to process visas if it's not going to be here, or process applications if it's not going to be here, should be in France or in other European countries. And finally, that would be the position to take, that a fair system is one that does grant refugee protection based on need, not how someone travels. And what we need are safe routes and a compassionate process. We don't have a compassionate process at the moment, and the one that's planned is looking worse, and we must have safe routes for people to get here. So thank you. That's a whistle-stop tour, and I'm sorry I've gone over time, but thank you very much.
No, don't worry about the time at all, Caroline. It was really interesting, and I think it's important for us to get some of those key definitions that you gave at the beginning, so we understand exactly what is being talked about in this bill. I think some of the things that you brought to light are just so upsetting and shocking, and I think for me the thing that really resonated was what you were saying about not being believed, having to justify your own pain, and why you've taken this like really difficult and dangerous journey is just something that I really cannot understand. And absolutely, we're dealing with a government with zero compassion for those who live here already, and there's no way that they would extend any kind of compassion to people who are coming here out of absolute need. So yeah, really grateful for your talk, and I'm sure that there will be some very interesting questions at the end of the session. So if you could stop sharing your screen, and I will just introduce our next speaker. So next we've got Helen Kiddon, who left Eritrea as a child with her family and has a long experience of working with Eritrean women's organizations on human rights issues, and now with the community of people seeking sanctuary in Bristol from many different countries. She's an experienced speaker and has particular interest in the way that the climate emergency is driving conflict and migration in many parts of the world. So thank you so much for joining us, Helen, and your 10 minutes or so, don't worry about it, starts now. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, good evening. My name is Helen Kiddon. Thank you for introducing me, Jenny. I will discuss, climate change, but look at how mining is having an impact also on conflict and migration in the Horn of Africa. So to give some context, the Horn of Africa is a region that has been plagued by droughts, conflict, and political turmoil. It is also one of the most turbulent regions in the world, and a number of refugees worldwide come from that region. So in the past 20 to 30 years, we've seen droughts becoming more recurrent and less rainfall. When rainfall does come, it's heavy and it causes a lot of damage to farming, livestock, and people's homes and livelihoods. So we've recently seen the floods in South Sudan, which is a testament to the fragile ecosystem in the region. As a means of trying to develop, African governments invariably put pressure on the finite arable land, which is used for farming and livestock across communities in the Horn of Africa. The governments provide land to multinational corporations for mining at the expense of the people, and no recompense from the removal of their ancestral lands. So furthermore, there is no proper analysis of the environmental damage, both short-term and long-term, in an already fragile ecosystem. There is no work in investing in the biodiversity of the areas that are being mined, and the various metals which enter the rivers are environmental hazards. And these rivers are the lifeline of so many communities. This has been a source of instability causing rise to conflict. We have seen the conflict in South Sudan amongst various ethnic groups, which was mainly about arable land to graze their livestock, which is key to their survival. And obviously the arable land is decreasing due to further desertification. This is in part because of mismanagement by the government in terms of creating sustainable development for the various affected communities. This is not a problem merely of South Sudan, but afflicts all the countries in the Horn of Africa. In Eritrea, mining has meant that Eritrean conscripts were being used, which resulted in forced labor and slavery. There are no worker unions to protect their rights, no transparency in respect to the environmental impact, human rights abuses, and the financial flow from the lucrative deals arising from mining. So 3 Eritreans who previously worked for Nepson in Eritrea have brought a case against Nepson, a Canadian mining company, for forced labor and human rights abuses while they worked in Bisha mining. This is the first time that a case is being brought to a court for a Canadian mining company in Canada. Neptune signed a deal with the Serbian government 3 years ago in respect to mining in Serbia. The mining was due to start this year, and in respect to this, the government changed the mining laws. This has led to widespread protests in Serbia over the last couple of weeks by activists who are claiming that there would be irreparable environmental damage that will be caused by it. This has led to detention of activists and other crackdowns by the government. In the midst of the conflict in Ethiopia, Neptune has recently signed a deal with Tigray regional government about a month ago to mine in the area. Tigray is at the heart of the conflict in Ethiopia, of which 2 million people have already been internally displaced a year into the conflict, and where ethnic cleansing is taking place. The Saudis a number of years ago bought arable land in Ethiopia to farm, to feed their people, as Saudi Arabia is predominantly desert and not conducive for farming. This has meant that Ethiopians have been displaced from their land with their cattle, and no compensation was made by the government. There are also many other multinational corporations and businesses that have bought land in Ethiopia. This is having an impact on the environment and leaving people hungry, as they are unable to farm on what is given to them as desertification spreads, and the best lands are given to corporations to farm on and use for industrial production. All of this has had an impact on the ethnic conflict that is currently taking place, and with it, nations of the Middle East have involved themselves in the conflict. As climate change impacts an ever-growing number of people across the Horn and East Africa, ethnic conflicts are likely to spread, and water shortages in the Middle East are likely to be a source of conflict. Ethiopia's building of the dam is causing serious tensions with Egypt and Sudan, as this will mean reduced water in the Nile, which starts in Ethiopia. All of this is impacting countless communities across national borders. This stalemate, in which people are unable to feed themselves because of climate change and mismanagement of the environment, has led to internally displaced people in their respective countries, human rights abuses, genocide, forced removal from their lands, and migration. We need to understand that climate change has already impacted and affected the global south, and many coming to the global north are fleeing climate change and conflict which has been induced as a result of this. Therefore, by current trends, we can predict that the level of migration worldwide will increase with more refugees. It is therefore tragic that the EU and the new bill in the UK are all based on keeping refugees and asylum seekers out without proper analysis and consideration of the problem, and thinking about the long-term effects of climate change and its role in violent conflict and migration. No one chooses to be a refugee, and climate change is already impacting the UK, and therefore a radical way of looking at things is required. Increased refugees only creates more conflicts, insecurity, human rights abuses, and slavery. It is imperative that we take a long-term view, as a lot more countries are going to be affected by climate change, and we need to prepare for refugees worldwide to resettle and find safe routes to ensure that all are given refuge. We should also ensure that current refugees and asylum seekers in the UK are included in the process of how to resolve these issues, as they have already been affected by it, and there is much that we could learn. It is important that we start planning and thinking about this now, and not start looking for solutions when we are already affected by it, and this does not leave us much time. Whilst the UN recognizes things like persecution of religion, race, political affiliation, and ethnicity as reasons for being a refugee, it still does not recognize that climate change is forcibly making people refugees. The complication arises, as in the case of the Horn of Africa, that people never claim asylum because of climate change, but due to conflict, human rights abuses, genocide, torture, or other inhumane acts. But this is not related to climate change, which has further complicated matters. So if we are to work on climate change, we need to think about how do we replenish deforestation, how to work with communities so they can live sustainably and are empowered to do so, holding governments accountable for mismanagement of the environment, and holding multinational corporations accountable for the environment. And this is more important in the developing countries where accountability and transparency is lacking. So, and we also need to continue to advocate and lobby governments and international institutions to include climate change as a core component in respect to the human rights mechanism. Thank you very much.
Wow, Helen, that was so interesting in 10 minutes. So, like, there are so many points there that really, you know, brought this subject to life. I think, you know, the interconnectedness of all these different issues, and that there's really not one thing that drives refugees or asylum seekers to flee their home countries and come to different countries. It's a, you know, farming, environment, internal displacement, food management, all of these things that are interconnected that impact people's lives and their livelihoods, and don't allow them to live happily and sustainably in the place that they want to live. I think I think what you said about no one chooses to be a refugee is something that is really, you know, resonates massively. Who would want to leave the place that they grew up and loved for somewhere else? Nobody chooses that. So thank you so much for bringing your personal perspective, and also a really detailed and well-rounded perspective as well. It was very interesting to hear what you had to say.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Okay, so remember everyone to drop any questions that you might have into the chat. So now we have our final speaker of the evening. So our third speaker is Judith Large, who has worked on crisis response and recovery in war zones and post-conflict transition, looking at mass population displacement and resettlement. She's worked in frontline roles, as well as tackling policy issues. She currently advises on forced migration project at the Conflict Analysis Research Centre at the University of Kent, where she's a senior fellow. And she's actively engaged with Napier Barracks, supporting asylum seekers who are detained there, advocacy, lobbying for its closure, and she's actively campaigning against the Nationality and Borders Bill, which she is going to tell us more about now. So thank you very much, Judith.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you, Caroline and Helen, for very astute contributions already. I'm going to follow your footsteps and build on some of the points that you've brought up. Caroline, from your presentation, this issue of the story, the human being, the cost of this type of departure and travel that any asylum seeker incurs, and the very idea that they won't be believed, they'll be humiliated on arrival, that individual personal side. And Helen, the upheaval which climate change is causing, indeed the World Bank and others looking at the interweaving of climate change with political conflict predict something like 1.2 billion people on the move by 2050. People are on the move. Now, this is a very emotive topic, not least because less than 2 weeks ago, we were getting headlines like migrants stuck at Belarus border become political pawns, dozens of migrants drown in Channel Dinghy tragedy. The headlines were there, the emotive feeling of distress and often not knowing what to do was there. At the time, Krishnan Guru Murphy of Channel 4 News tweeted, and he said, "Not migrants, people, that's all." I thought these were eloquent words. And part of our challenge, if we want to deal with this challenge for our country, for policy and in our communities, part of the challenge in fighting this Nationality and Borders Bill is to balance that human quality of understanding that it's people like us in situations and scenarios where they need to move, balancing that with some awareness of what can be mind-numbing statistics about the overall problem. So just to throw out a few, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees has just updated its estimates for people on the move this year by the end of 2021. And they've upped it to 84 million people Now, many of those are within their own countries. They're internally displaced people. And Helen touched on that. If you're an IDP in your own country, you've nowhere to go, but you have the same plight and needs as those who are seeking asylum. That's a lot of people. We want to better understand how climate change has been playing into this. And there's increasing attention, for example, in Syria, at the fact that drought was raising the cost of grain, which raised the price of bread prior to 2011, at the same time as when the government was reducing subsidies. So there was great unease and food insecurity, and we're better understanding how mobilizing for war, it goes right down to human needs, and the rest is indeed history. So let's look at Syria in its 11th year of conflict. I would say they're still in their 11th year of war. And these big estimates are difficult, but as near as we can tell, or World Vision's most recent ones, are that 6.8 million refugees and asylum seekers have fled from Syria. 6.7 million people are displaced within Syria. 6.8 million, 6.7 million, massive numbers. About 5 million are in the region. We know Turkey is hosting 3 million refugees, and Lebanon about 1.5 million. Lebanon, a country where a year ago already 50% of Lebanese households were facing food insecurity. So this is the type of perspective and sense of proportion that I think we need when our government reassures us that because we accepted 20,000 Syrians on an official formal scheme, we are really the top of the league. It's not that each of those 20,000 isn't an important human being, and it's important to have them. And many communities have worked brilliantly to host families and to find housing and to make this possible. It's just that the question remains whether we're doing enough. Appropriating aid, trying to find solutions, the questions remain large. And the image, if you like, of 2015, when 1.5 million Syrians found their way to Europe, probably stays in everyone's minds. And I'd like to try to just reflect a little bit on what happened there and at the responses of the near neighborhood of which we are a part, and then come to look really squarely at where we are now with this bill and possible ways forward on the big picture and with the bill itself. So in the near neighborhood, when these thousands and thousands of people fled, I mean, we're talking literally about arrivals in train stations in European cities, people in their thousands only bringing what they could carry. And Mrs. Merkel, who just stepped down today from Germany, but leading the way about how Germany would not say no, they would not turn away such people who needed assistance. And the generosity which poured out was very, very impressive right across the board. People coming to Stockholm train station with blankets and hot soup, the same being repeated in Austria and in Germany. But it's a lot of people to absorb. And while you can find success stories and tremendous examples of what is called good integration 6 years later, there have also been the odd incident that caught the headlines, or the more frequently the appropriation of grievance by the far right, which uses social media and a lot of publicity. So there's an unease now. There's a less certainty about the generosity that was initially offered. Now, the EU responded in some ways in a shadowy sense, in a negative sense, with the Khartoum process, for example, which literally paid Sudan. And when I say Sudan, I mean militia groups who were partly responsible for the atrocities in Darfur, to keep would-be migrants, people, out of Europe, to keep them within Africa, to keep them within Sudan. There was gradually a realization in Brussels that this was contributing to negative political effects in Sudan itself, when you legitimize and support such a military wing. So they did change that, but now there's a similar agreement with Libya, which is just as sinister and possibly even more ugly because Libya detains. And there have been recent articles, revelations about the thousands being kept back because they dared to think they would travel north, being kept back in Libya. There's also an arrangement with Turkey. So we can say that these were rather darker reactions, like Frontex and more policing of the shores. And we're mimicking that. We're not alone. We could argue that we're not alone in needing to defend borders. And on the very negative side, Denmark has been said to be having a race to the bottom in that they've already passed laws to do offshoring. They haven't actually started it yet, but that's a first. And they would be like Hungary, the only two countries who've decided Syria is a safe place to return, to deport people back to Syria rather than grant them leave to stay. So that's quite a bleak picture. However, civil society in all of these countries, if I may use that phrase, meaning again, people like us, have been out there protesting and offering support and doing the same thing that I think we're trying to do here in saying we do offer sanctuary, we do believe in open doors, we have to find ways to make this work. And just in the last month, the EU has changed tack in a way in that the Parliament and the Commission have agreed on an EU agency for asylum, where they will help and assist all EU countries to make applications and processing more efficient and faster. They'll have 500 experts to do that. They've given a budget of 9.8 billion euros to help with integration in all of the states which participate. And they're advancing this new call for sharing responsibility within Europe. So there are positive signs, and that seems to me to be a model, the notion of making procedures faster. They even have a monitor system for fundamental rights. So they'll have people assigned to do drop-ins, to visit, to assist, and to check up on the fundamental rights of refugees and asylum seekers when they arrive. So there are positive models. Do we have anything like that? No. And the present bill makes things only worse. I tried to read Hansard in advance of this discussion this evening, and it's quite mind-blowing, and I think I need new reading glasses. But the debates have gone on and on yesterday and today. And some of the debates really, even when they offer amendments, I stopped after 150 amendments to this bill. It is so controversial. The government itself has brought 80 amendments. Priti Patel herself yesterday brought an amendment when she decided, well, maybe it wouldn't be a criminal act or a crime if you saved a life at sea. Well, that's big of her. That's a change, but it's extremely complex. It's drawn enormous feedback. The Welsh government and the Scottish government have given position papers where they strongly disagree with the approach by the British government. This is phenomenal. So this points the way for possibilities. And I'd like to name a few directions that I think those possibilities need to go in. And before I do that, I will say on the legal side, that the Attorney General has this week also issued another statement on why judicial reviews need to be toned down. And we need to be very careful that this attack on the judiciary and the promotion of the hostile environment don't converge in a way that there's no pushback, there's no right of appeal. So we have to have our eye on all these different balls. But the first thing that we can all work on is to shift from a culture of hostility and threat to one of welcome and protection. Protection is meant to underline all nations in their receiving of refugees. Uganda has 1.5 million refugees within its borders. We don't perhaps agree with everything the Ugandan government does or how democracy functions there, but they honor the United Nations obligations in terms of how they accept and protect refugees. So we have to shift culture, that's our own culture, that's who we talk to, what we believe, how this is dealt with in our communities, how people see it. Secondly, a massive need for institutional and legal reform. And the first thing with this bill would be safe routes, the acknowledgement that there are none at the moment, and the establishment of safe routes and reasonable reception and protection measures when people arrive. And then there are two more things, one of which goes right back to Helen's case study, in that we cannot pretend to close our borders and shut out the world, and indeed cut our aid budget by 31%, when the very root causes, the very reasons for upheaval and for people being forced to move need addressing as well, and may have something to do with our own policies overseas. So we have to find a way that foreign policy links with domestic policy, that we see there are consequences, that our actions overseas, think Iraq, we could talk about Iraq in another session totally, have a sort of what goes around comes around effect for us, or what has been called blowback. Now, lastly, this needs resources. Yes, all of these things need resources, but we have to ask the questions, and we have to reframe some of the questions that we're asking. So we've recently had huge statistics, over 1 million shortages in the workforce. We know that hospitality, services, social care are crying out for people to work in them. Well, how about if you match those needs with the skills and the potential that people are bringing? How about if we think that way? If we think not of the threat, but of the opportunity and the gift of new human resources and new people, that would be something. How about a social economic audit of the real costs of detention, of prolonged, agonizing, repeated asylum and appeals in the system, the cost of that versus the cost of early processing, training, and allowing people to work. Some of the amendments going through are thankfully about letting people work after 6 months, but we would like to see them know after 6 months whether they can stay as well. So this is a way of changing thinking and changing how we deal with the problem. I'm encouraged by the objections and the protests at the bill. The border force themselves, Public and Commercial Services Union, the union that the workers belong to, have joined Help for Calais in a court action against the Home Secretary, against the bill. There are all kinds of formal legal proceedings going on. We mentioned legal opinions, and I'll close on this note. The Attorney General has voiced a legal opinion that harm to human rights of a few, and she noted particular young age groups of young males who come here, harm to their rights is proportionally permissible because of the gain to the security and protection of our country. I think that's a very warped and slightly sinister view of proportionality. I think this whole debate is totally out of proportion, and it's people like ourselves who can bring it back into some sort of human scale. That's why I welcome this evening. That's why I welcome the title you've given it, because I firmly believe there is room at the inn. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judith, and a lovely sign off there from the conversation. I think, I mean, some of the stuff again that you've brought to light is so shocking, especially around our absolute lack of support for refugees in comparison to the global stage, you know, like where we are, how we pat ourselves on the back for taking such few people in such great need. I think that, you know, throughout all of the three presentations, what we've heard is that these are human stories, and that this is a human conversation that we're having. This is about real people that can be affected at any point in their lives, and that are people who are just like us. who've had their lives turned upside down. And I think another theme that ran through everyone's conversation was around this interconnectedness of, it's not just one thing that is causing these problems. It's our foreign policy, it's our home policy, it's you know, food insecurity, internal displacements, climate change, and how do we tackle all of these individual things in order to help people be where they need to be, and in a safe and secure way as well. I think there's a lot of things swirling around my mind right now that I'm sure if there's not enough questions that come up, I will absolutely be asking some. I'll be taking the chair's benefit and asking some questions, but I see that we do have some in the chat, so I'm going to set us off already. So Sarah H, you asked the first question. If you'd like to unmute yourself and turn your camera on and ask our chairs, maybe if all of the speakers could have their cameras on now, that would be great, just so that we can, if whoever wants to come in can put their hand up for this question, so I can see your faces and your hands. That would be great. I don't know where our third speaker is, but Helen, are you? If you're there, then if you could turn your camera on. Okay, Sarah, handing over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm there. Sorry, it kicked me out, but I had bad connection.
Oh, okay, don't worry. It was around the UNHCR.
Oh, okay. Shall I ask it? Hello, everyone, and especially Caroline, Judith, and Helen. Judith, hi. Thank you. You did touch on legal processes just now. So in a sense, my question follows on from what you've just said, and I'd like to ask you and Caroline and Helen a little bit more about legal recourse, really. First of all, I phrased the question like this: how much muscle does UNHCR have to enforce the Geneva Convention in the face of national legislation such as the UK Anti-Refugee Bill? That's a slightly sort of rhetorical question, but you know what I'm driving at. And if it's limited, a little bit more, please, about the sort of legal routes that campaigners and others could take to try to limit and turn down this noxious bill.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. If Judith, you want to come in first, and then we can see
Sure.
if Caroline.
I'll make a stab at it. The fools rush in, as they say. They don't have any muscle, Sarah, but they have the knowledge, and they have the capacity to assist. And this is what interests me so much about this country, that, and you'll know this from your work, that when we had DFID, as well as the Foreign Office, we were telling other countries all the time to work with UNHCR, to follow the statutes, to offer what the UN prescribed, what international humanitarian law. We had legal experts to train, but we don't do it ourselves, nor do we listen to the United Nations rapporteurs when they come in and have things to say here about the quality of housing or issues that they are mandated to brief on. Now, having said they have no muscle, they've been working very hard. They have a guide to asylum reform in the United Kingdom. And so in this sense, they have sort of convening power and moral legitimacy, that we all find out what could be done to reform the asylum system by looking at their lead. They have a whole thick manual designed for parliamentarians, which developing countries, often the parliamentarians do workshops, they read it, they understand it, because they want to be part of a wider whole and a system which meets needs. So that's where the muscle comes, is if we can convince our own people to take this on board, if we can decolonize whatever mindset it is that finds itself not needing or superior to the United Nations mandates when it comes to us. That's one offering.
Thanks, Judith. Caroline or Helen, did you want to come in on this question? No? Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, Sarah, for your question. Really appreciate you getting involved. So the next question comes from Peter Carter. If you'd like to turn your camera on and ask your question, Peter.
Well, it says I can't turn the camera on because the host has stopped it.
Oh.
But maybe that's sort of something to do with the question. I've just wondered whether one of the speakers would like to comment on those provisions, which I believe are in the bill, which will give the government new powers to remove British citizenship, essentially from people that they do not like.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Anyone want to come in on that first? Just pop your hands up. Nobody? Does anyone know about this? Oh, Judith, sorry, are you coming in? Oh, you're muted, Judith.
Yes, I wondered if Caroline wanted to come in.
Well,
Oh,
I mean, I would just say it's completely outrageous. That's as far as I've got with it, and I hope Judith will be something more constructive than me.
Okay, at the risk of talking too much, this did feature in today's Hansard from the debates, which that would reflect yesterday quite strongly, and there were very heated debates in Parliament about the clauses in the bill. The power to remove passports has been there for some time, but used in very exceptional circumstances, which I hadn't fully realized before, but I think Caroline had told me that at one point. So we are all in this together in terms of learning and understanding. The dangerous thing now, the new thing seems to be that this bill needs to spell out that it can be done without the person knowing, and that the fact that they didn't know is no defense, because the powers of the Home Secretary, herself or himself, are being expanded in quite a grotesque way, so that anyone deemed a possible threat, and the whole notion of profiling and lack of evidence comes up in the debates in a very, very heated way. The notion of profiling comes up, and the particular vulnerability of people who have two passports because of their family history. So if you have a family history where you have a second country or second recourse, and some of the MPs were arguing quite passionately on behalf of constituents from South Asia, you are of particular vulnerability that the British one would just be taken away, and you would be informed perhaps when you tried to return to the country and weren't allowed in, or in some other manner, but there's no requisite letting you know, much less involving you in what's happening. And this is sinister, this is shocking, and this is dangerous.
Thanks, Judith and Caroline. And yes, sounds absolutely shocking and dangerous, really horrifying to learn all of these things about this bill. Thank you, Peter, for your question. Okay, so the next person I see is Alexandra, UK. If you'd like to come in and ask your question.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, thanks.
Hi, thanks very much. So I didn't see the vote today, but I did see that it was passed 298 to 231. So that surprised me because I wasn't sure the final vote in the Commons was going to take place today. And my understanding when I was teaching government and politics is that now it goes to the Lords, and it can be passed back and forth for some time. But the Lords can't actually stop a bill. That's the way I understood it. So and my experience has been that once it is passed in the House, that the Lords can make amendments or changes to it, right? But then eventually it will be passed again in the House. So in other words, is this a fait accompli now? And if so, what can we do? We've already written to our MPs and people are asking me, what can we do now? So thank you. Really
Thank you,
appreciate it.
Alexandra. Really good question. Really good question. Okay, Caroline's unmuted first, so
Okay,
let's go.
I'll have a bit of a go at this. I think it's really important to keep going as strongly as ever, in fact, if not more so. The more we talk about this, I think it's such an unknown area, the whole refugee business, that because it affects so few people directly. So the vast majority of population don't need to think about it. Since the whole thrust is to give the impression that refugees are a threat, then there's not a lot of incentive to fight it. But those of us who do know something and who care are trying to do that. And I think the more we talk about it, the better. I think myself, I think it's really important to keep writing to the local MP, to keep on, because I mean, Judith had more correspondence with her than I have, but I get the sense from listening to other people that she is actually now engaging a little bit more about it and replying. It's not much better the content necessarily, but there's some concern to reply to constituents about it, and I feel it's really important to keep going, and also to encourage the Lords, any Lord to talk about it, to get those amendments discussed, to get a discussion, a conversation about it. That's one thing I think we can do. There, I'm going to try and put in the chat in a minute. There's a really good little video YouTube piece from Lord Carr of Loch Kinlard, who has a very good refutation of some of the lies that the Home Secretary has put forward, and it's beautifully said. And you think, well, there's the same voice in the House of Lords. More of that, please. So that's what I can say. Thank you.
Thanks, Caroline. Judith or Helen, would you like to come in on this question with any response? I think Helen's dropping out a little bit and in, so she apologizes, but hopefully we'll get her back for the end. But if you don't have anything to add, Judith, at this point, that's fine. And I think exactly the message there, just keep going, and keep going some more. And just, this conversation will never stop being had, I think. So we just need to, shout louder. Helen, you're there, and I can see you're unmuted. Did you want to come in on this question?
Oh no, I just sorry, I missed out a bit. I was going to come back onto the first question about UNHCR, but because of my
Oh, we seem to have frozen again. Okay, well, hopefully we will get you back, Helen, and you can definitely come back in on that first question, no problem. Okay, so I'll just keep going through the questions. So our next one is from Liz and Martin Whiteside. If you'd like to unmute and ask your question.
Hi, and this is for me initially. Liz has got another one a bit later on. I really was picking up Judith's point about what's happening within Europe, which sounds a little bit positive in a very bleak overall or situation, and it does seem that we do need, despite leaving the EU, to try and work with our European neighbours if we possibly can. And I just wondered what scope there is in the new scheme for us to also participate and welcome at least our fair share, not more, of those refugees that are coming and migrants that are coming into Europe, because many of them will come through Europe because of geography, and we want to sort of welcome and our share. So are there mechanisms to do that, or can we only do that by pointing to a better example from Europe?
Thanks, Martin. So I think it was around Judith's point on the schemes that Europe are currently implementing, the shining light in the absolute sea of horror that is immigration policy. So is there any mechanisms for us to get involved in that? How can we do it? And how can we support and work with our European neighbours in order to help as many refugees as possible?
We have a problem. because we've said to Europe that we are too different and special and global to be part of that. And I think that's coming back to bite us a little bit. One of the offshoring possibilities was, as Caroline was describing, was Albania, I think, and I gather that the government of Albania didn't see it that way. We did belong to a convention, Dublin, I think, was it 1, 2, and 3? I mean, we belonged to a cluster of agreed, consensual, cooperative states who wanted to work with this in a way that was cooperative, and we opted out. So sadly, there's nothing we can opt into unless we have very robust politicians who are prepared to make a break with that Brexit position. Martin, was that what you were meaning? Because that is quite bleak in its own way, and I realize it. We can lobby to expand the resettlement, and we can continue to work on the nature of the asylum system and changing the asylum system, which everyone agrees is in a mess. They have more eloquent words. We can do that, but at the same time, we're all, I would have thought, extremely shocked by the revelations about how few Afghans made it back, in spite of this being a showpiece of our response to refugee crises in the world. And this is gut-wrenching. This is also people's lives. So the credibility gap is quite large at the moment, and we mustn't lose sight of the fine-tuned personal. If we can support a family to relocate, and we can actually sponsor a family, yes. But on the big picture, it will take, as Caroline said, not giving up, keeping our eye on the ball, helping people see things slightly differently, or helping people realize, to put very bluntly, that there are some lies at work here, that perhaps things aren't as they are made to seem, because that longer term is crucial, but it's going to be much harder. And I imagine this will also be a case where you'll have, as we've seen in the past, direct action of protecting people who are going to be deported. And this has been done in other European countries in past times as well, of caring enough in an asylum-seeking community to make a stand and to make a noise. And that, as well as the letter writing and the lobbying, is going to have a role.
Thank you.
Thanks, Judith. And I'm very impressed that you managed to get through that whole thing with just saying the B word once. Caroline or Helen, did you want to come in on that question? If not, I'm sure there's lots of more questions that we can go through.
I'll leave it to Caroline because I got booted out. I'm just trying to reconnect on another laptop, so I'll leave it to Caroline if you don't mind.
Okay, thank you, Helen. Thanks, Helen. Don't worry.
Thank you, Helen. Missing you. Just briefly to say that there's been, so in Bristol there are two large hotels full of Afghan families, and the people who are the local authority is supporting them. So they've come under a resettlement scheme, but the local authority, and they're doing a brilliant job, but they don't themselves know what scheme they're under. So it now has become clearer in the last 2 days that the resettlement scheme actually hasn't begun. So there are those 15,000 people who were brought, what an amazing number, from Kabul, and that's it. And they're not yet. They're not settled. I mean, they're mostly still living in hotels. That is very difficult for local authorities to find the accommodation. But it's that there simply isn't a joined upness between the government and local authorities in this. And there is no, currently, the Afghan resettlement scheme has not begun. 20,000 promised again, not begun, except for people trying to cross the channel.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline, for those comments as well. Okay, so I'm just running through the chat. I think the next question might be from Liz Whiteside. So
okay, well, it was really actually Caroline sort of answered it,
okay.
which is really around the rhetoric that government is using to sort of reflect criticism, which is being taken up a lot by our local MP, which lots of people have been lobbying our local MP. And one of the things that, you know, she comes up with the fact that she mostly supports the right of genuine asylum seekers, but it's illegal migrants that she's trying to stop. But then she seems to be more and more talking about the resettlement program as the way forward, which, as you know, is absolutely tiny. And Caroline has just said the Afghani so-called resettlement program is really hardly getting going at all. So in response to our MP, is there absolutely any evidence whatsoever that our government is trying to put any resources into any other way for asylum seekers to reach this country, apart from getting across the channel? Because there was some suggestion of processing in Europe. I don't know whether that's going to go ahead at all. But certainly I don't see any evidence of any kind of other resettlement programs that might work. So it's to me that basically the bill is absolutely cutting off every single opportunity for people to seek asylum for all the reasons that Caroline and Judith have given us.
Okay, thanks, Liz. Judith or Caroline, would you like to come in on that? I know I think that a lot of these points have been touched on, but if there's any final comments on this issue, that would be great. Thanks. Oh, and Helen's back as well. Oh, no, she's gone again. Sorry. Caroline.
I think my sense is that it is as bleak as you say, and that that there has been an emphasis on resettlement as that's the way the government chooses to go or wants to be seen to be going, because they can make it out as being legal and the decision has been made by UNHCR, so people must be genuine and so on. So they want to pose that against the illegality of the usual route of claiming asylum. But the truth is that it's almost non-existent, that program as well. But it's kind of giving a cover for appearing to be doing something. That's yeah, I'm sure Judith's got a lot more to add. Thank you.
No, I think Toni Morrison said that the definitions belong to the definers and the defined have no say. And that's what happens if you have the good fortune to be defined. When you mention UNHCR giving formal status, if you can reach that, that's excellent. Then you qualify for formal resettlement. But the UN would be the first to say that asylum seekers must have their pleas for sanctuary honored. I was puzzled historically when this distinction came up, the difference, because for example, in Folkestone, in the old train station right by the harbor, they have a beautiful sculpture of about 5 very profound faces, you know, faces who have suffered. And it's a sculpture in honor of the thousands of Belgian refugees who came in the 1940s. It's absolutely beautiful. Now, no one asked them, do you have a piece of paper defining you as a refugee? Because everyone just was fleeing the desperation of war. And I finally found a source arguing that it was only during the Cold War that when there was a bit of suspicion of people flooding out of the so-called Soviet bloc, that states themselves began not granting refugee status immediately, but asking that people have this new designation of asylum seeker. Asylum seeking itself is ancient, and cultures all over the world make it a mark of their honor and their respect. It's part of one of their definitions is to receive those who are in need. But this proves very fertile ground for the 2 tiers that the secretary, well, is putting forth in this bill, the Home Secretary, and that's a great sadness. But we mustn't feel trapped or beguiled by that limitation of formal resettlement. that's one of the challenges, is to talk people around understanding that.
Thanks, Judith, and thanks, Liz, for your question as well. Okay, so with timing in mind and with us looking like we might have Helen back, I wanted to maybe invite the three speakers to give some final comments. Helen, if you wanted to give your response to that initial question, that would also be greatly appreciated. And then give any final comments that you have, and then we'll go to Caroline and Judith, and then we will close up the session. So Helen, if you need me to repost the question, then I can do that as well. Oh, have we lost Helen? We've lost Helen. She looks like she's having internet nightmare. So, okay, we will go to Caroline for some final comments. Oh, Helen's back. Helen?
Sorry, you just wanted me to give final comments, or somebody else started? I would just put it out quickly.
No, that would be great if you could go, Helen. Thank you. Please go.
Yeah, it's still telling me my connection is unstable. No, I mean, the thing is the new borders bill, like I said, I think is really short-sighted because it's not really looking into the future. It's just looking at the here and now. And things are really changing dramatically worldwide with conflicts, but also climate change. So I think there is a lot of work to be done. I think there is a lot of advocacy and lobbying that needs to be done. And I think we really need to think about how we do that, because it's not just it not just has implications for now, it has long-term implications as well. And I think the politicization of refugees on the Belarus-Polish border is an example in sight, and what's happening in Libya now is exactly part of that as well. So I think we really need to have a broader view of it, because this bill, if people are fleeing persecution this way or that way, people are going to find a way to come. We're not going to ever stop refugees. We're never going to stop people seeking asylum. It's part of the human DNA. We've always been migrating. The issue is, how do we deal with it, and how do we plan, knowing that climate change is really going to impact the level of migration in the future to much higher levels. What can we do now to prepare for that? Because preparing to stop it is never going to work, because we're never going to stop it, people migrating. So sorry, that's my conclusion.
No, thank you, Helen. That's we have to be realists about the situation that we find ourselves in, and plan in a way that creates a positive outcome for everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. Apologies about your connection issues. We really appreciate you being here. Caroline, if you'd like to go next. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen, for your final comments. I'm glad you could come back in, because I agree with everything you say. And also I'm thinking, the old phrase is coming to mind, think global, act local. And I do think that each of us has a really important role to play in how we talk about these issues, just with our friends, our neighbours, each other, and to keep it on the agenda, because it's so easy to just turn aside when we have the relative privilege of not being faced with force to move. So this phrase, the luck of birth, resonates with me enormously. It is only our good luck that we don't have to do that, if we don't have to do that. And to keep open the willingness to do, as Helen says, to see what the bigger picture is, and that we will need to welcome people and to be ready to welcome, which everybody here I'm sure is feeling that anyway, but I think it's so important to keep talking about it and keep supporting each other to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. And again, we really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us tonight. Okay, Judith, if you can finish us off with your final comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all the discussants and the questions from participants, Jenny, for chairing us. And to my co-panelists very much, because I think you, between you, you really blend the local experience and the big picture. And that's what I would hope we would all aspire to do. Study after study is showing us that while it's well and good to combat illegal traffickers, etc., and certainly there is exploitation and gain being made from people, just as the politicization or securitization is a crass and exploitative thing to watch. But study after study shows that people will find a way themselves. They'll get that dinghy themselves. They'll think, oh, it's just over the water, we can do it, you know, with no experience. And that speaks very strongly of the desperation and motivation, which is what Helen's expressing. People will try to come. People have moved and they will move. People are on the move. A lot of this is forced migration. Last weekend, a woman who's in her 90s, who's active on environmental issue and who was born during the First World War, I guess, and was certainly a young woman during the Second. I asked her whether she'd ever seen anything like this current crisis with migration and with upheaval. And she said she hadn't. And she said, what we're looking at, she said, is the beginning of tomorrow. And that really stayed with me, because Helen's words are actually quite prophetic. That people will keep trying and they will come. And we make life no easier for ourselves and no better for the wider world if we deny that fact and seek to raise other kinds of walls in terms of our thinking and our attitudes and our barriers. They won't stand for long against that in the long term. So thank you for this opportunity to explore these issues and to share them. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Judith. We really appreciate everybody joining us this evening for this really important conversation. We really appreciate the three panelists taking time out of what seems like very busy schedules to talk us through what is an absolutely monstrous bill, and as something that a better understanding of it can help us understand how we can fight against it. I think that that's what the Cloud Cafe has brought to us over the last 2 years is, you know, knowledge and understanding is power. And I think that that's what we have to remember. I think that there's, you know, lots of things that have resonated this evening, and the key themes that have run through the conversation that we've had around language, the narrative, misinformation, how we can reframe immigration and asylum as a positive benefit to our country, and having new people come here, and how we can create a better life for everybody together. I think the what you just mentioned right at the end there around, you know, I think we've said this quite a few times around change happens around the dinner table. We have to have these conversations, however difficult they are. I think what Caroline said about people, because they're disconnected from this subject, they don't have an understanding of what it is. So teach your friends, talk to your friends, tell them about where they can find more information. And I think that that will help us and help everyone, hopefully, in the long term. Because I think that that's one of the things that Helen was really talking about a lot, is that long-term planning. A lot of this is just reactionary, short-term. We need long-term planning, not just for the climate, but for the people and for the places and for the world. So write to your MP, start protesting, welcome people with open arms at every opportunity that you have, and let's you know, never stop fighting for a better world. Thank you so much, everybody, for taking the time out and joining us this evening, and all the evenings that you've given us this year. We so appreciate it. Yes, please turn your cameras back on and let's see all your smiling faces. Thank you to everybody who organizes the Cloud Cafes, especially Elizabeth. I know that she And Sue and Lynn and Martin and everybody behind the scenes. We really appreciate you bringing us together for these really important conversations. Thank you for having me as the host. I do love it, and I do love learning, and I do love engaging with you all and seeing your beautiful faces. So have a very safe Christmas and New Year, as fun as possible, as fun as is possible within the limitations of safety. So yes, enjoy. Hopefully we'll get to see some of you maybe at Stroud Market if that's still happening. And thank you so much. Merry Christmas. Or any holiday that you may celebrate, may it be merry. And we'll see you soon. Thank you so much. We'll see you in 2022.
Thank you to everybody, and thank you for inviting me.
No problem. Thanks, Helen.
Happy New Year, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.